She built his empire with bare hands and bleeding loyalty. She laundered his money, buried his enemies, and stood in the dark beside him when the whole world wanted him dead. And the moment he became untouchable, the moment the chandeliers shone bright and the politicians lined up to shake his hand, he replaced her, dressed her up as a ghost, and handed her crown to another woman. But Serafina Morello never disappeared. She was waiting. And tonight, in front of everyone he ever wanted to impress, she is going to take back every single thing he owes her. If you're watching this story until the very end, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The Black Crest. Gala happened every year on the third Saturday of November, and every year it was the same performance. Black cars lined up 6 deep outside the Harmon Continental Hotel. Men in tailored tuxedos moved through marble lobbies. Women draped in silk and diamonds laughed at things that weren't funny because it was expected of them. Photographers positioned outside the main entrance captured everything. Angles, expressions, the exact way a man held a glass of scotch. Because at the Black Crest Gala, image was not vanity, it was currency. The Continental's grand ballroom seated 400, and tonight, every seat was occupied. Politicians from 3 different state offices, 2 federal judges who had never officially met, 8 legitimate CEOs whose portfolios were cleaner than their consciences, a handful of foreign investors whose names appeared on no domestic registry, and scattered throughout, placed with deliberate casualness, the key lieutenants and underbosses of the Morello organization, men who looked like businessmen because Cassian had spent 11 years teaching them how. Cassian Morello stood near the center of the room at the intersection of the 2 main aisles, where the chandeliers overhead threw the most light. He was not a physically enormous man. He was 6 feet, lean through the chest, with a face that had once been described in a profile piece as disturbingly handsome, the kind of face that made people look twice and then feel vaguely unsettled about why they had. His jaw was sharp. His eyes were a cold amber color, the kind that looked warm until you studied them long enough to realize there was nothing warm in them at all. He wore a black Brioni tuxedo without a pocket square because he thought pocket squares were performative, and his hair was brushed back from his temples in a way that suggested he had not tried very hard, which was itself a kind of effort. He held a glass of Macallan 25, and he had not taken a sip in 40 minutes. He was working. Even here, among the chandeliers and the 4-piece jazz quartet and the obscene flower arrangements his event coordinator had charged him $60,000 to install, he was working. His eyes moved across the room in small, unhurried sweeps. He tracked conversations. He monitored the positioning of his men. He registered every new arrival at the ballroom's main entrance and cross-referenced each face against the mental index he had spent years building. Cassian Morello was not the most violent man who had ever run the East Coast underworld. He was the most attentive. That was how he had survived this long. Beside him, Vanessa Vale stood in a gown the color of deep red wine, strapless, with a low back that had made the event photographer visibly recalibrate his shot when she entered. She was 31. She had grown up in Connecticut, attended NYU on a partial scholarship, spent 4 years working in international finance, and then found herself in a midtown restaurant sharing a table with a man she had not expected to still be thinking about 3 months later. That was 2 years ago. Now she appeared at Cassian's side at every public function, and when people spoke about the future of the Morello name, they said her name alongside his. She had worked to earn that. She was not stupid. She was not naive. She understood the nature of the world she had entered with both eyes open, and she had decided the terms were acceptable. What she did not know, what almost no one in the ballroom knew, was that the world she believed she had entered was built on a foundation she had never been shown. "Ambassador Keech is going to try to corner you before dessert," she said quietly, standing close enough that her voice didn't travel. "He's been circling the room. 3rd lap." "I know," Cassian said. "He wants the Del Rey situation moved off the table." "I know that too." She tilted her head slightly. "Are you going to let him?" Cassian lifted his glass, appeared to take a sip without actually drinking, and set it back down. No. She accepted that without pushing further. That was one of the things he valued about her. She read the temperature of a conversation and adjusted. She did not require explanation for everything. She had been useful to him in ways that had surprised him early on and stopped surprising him over time, which was both a compliment to her and a quiet commentary on his own limitations. He was about to say something. He wasn't sure what. Something about Keach. Something about repositioning toward the East Terrace before the ambassador made his approach. When the main ballroom doors opened, he didn't look immediately. The doors had opened 11 times in the last hour. This was the 12th. There was no reason to treat it differently from the others, but the room changed. It was subtle at first. A drop in conversational volume across the nearest cluster of guests. The way sound moved through a space when something redirected attention. Then it spread. The jazz quartet didn't stop playing, but two of the musicians lost their timing for a beat. Cassian registered all of this in the peripheral space of his awareness, and something old and animal in him went quiet before his mind caught up to why. He turned toward the doors. She was standing just inside the entrance, and she had not moved. She wore ivory, not white, not cream, but the specific shade of ivory that existed between those two things, a dress that was cut simply and fell to the floor without drama. No jewelry except small pearl earrings. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face with a precision that looked effortless and was not. She was not wearing the expression of a woman who had just arrived. She was wearing the expression of a woman who had been here the entire time and had simply chosen now to be visible. Serafina Morello. Cassian's glass did not fall. He was too controlled for that, but his hand tightened around it with enough force that the tendons along his forearm pulled taut beneath the sleeve of his jacket, and the man standing 3 feet to his left, Marco De Luca, his head of security, who had known Cassian for 19 years, noticed it immediately and went very still. "Cassian," Marco said, not a question, a marker. "I see her," Cassian said. His voice was flat, uninflected. The voice he used when something had gone wrong in a way that required absolute surface control while everything beneath it reorganized. Vanessa had turned too, following the direction of his gaze, and now she was looking at the woman in the ivory dress with an expression that started as curiosity and was in the process of shifting into something harder. She did not yet know the name. She would figure it out within minutes. At this event, in this room, with these people, there was no version of this where she didn't. Serafina began walking. She moved through the crowd without hesitation, without performance, without looking to either side for acknowledgement or reaction. She walked the way a woman walks through a room she owns, not aggressively, not defiantly, but with a settled certainty in her own right to occupy the space that no amount of wealth or threat could manufacture in someone who didn't already carry it. The crowd parted. Not because security cleared a path, no security moved toward her. They stood frozen at their posts, every one of them, because every one of them had been briefed to admit no unauthorized guests, and not a single one of them could find the mechanism by which they were supposed to stop her. She reached the edge of the main gathering space and stopped 20 feet from Cassian. For a moment, the entire room hung in suspension. The quartet had stopped. Cassian hadn't told them to, but they had stopped. He looked at her across the 20 feet of marble floor and crystal light, and 400 witnesses, and what he felt was not guilt. He had spent a long time ensuring he would not feel guilt. What he felt was something worse, recognition. The specific, cold recognition of a man who understands that something he believed he had managed has not been managed at all. "Hello, Cassian," Serafina said. Her voice carried without effort. It always had. He said nothing for a long moment. Around him he could feel the room waiting. Every politician, every investor, every lieutenant, all of them recalibrating, repositioning, filing information with the rapid efficiency of people who had survived their respective worlds by understanding power dynamics before they fully resolved. "Serafina," he finally said. One word. Her name. The absence of everything else in his voice was itself a statement. She looked at him the way you look at something you have already finished grieving. Not with rage, not with tears, not with the wounded electricity of a woman who had been surprised. With the quiet, heavy clarity of one who had made her decision long before walking through these doors, and had simply been waiting for the correct moment to execute it. "We should talk," he said. The words were controlled, but underneath them was the particular tension of a man redirecting, trying to move this conversation somewhere private before it became something irreversible. "We should," she agreed, "but not privately." The room shifted again. That specific quality of atmospheric tension that fills a space when a public reckoning becomes unavoidable. Cassian's jaw worked once, almost imperceptibly. Marco had moved to a position 6 feet behind his right shoulder. 2 other members of the security detail had drifted inward from the room's perimeter. Cassian did not look at any of them. He kept his eyes on Serafina. "This isn't the time," he said. "You've had 5 years," she said. "If not now, when?" There was no good answer to that. He knew it. She knew he knew it. Vanessa spoke. Her voice was careful, measured, the voice of a woman trying to assess a situation before committing to a position. "Cassian, who is this?" He didn't answer. The silence he left told Vanessa more than an answer would have. She was smart enough to understand that, and he watched the understanding move through her expression like weather moving through a window, controlled on the outside, turbulent beneath. "Her name," said one of the guests nearby, Alderman Frost, whose discretion was legendary and whose current expression made a lie of everything, "is Serafina Morello." The name landed in the room the way a stone lands in still water, concentric. Vanessa turned to look at Cassian with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was not anger, not yet. It was the face of a person recalculating everything from the foundation, pulling at a thread and watching a much larger structure begin to unravel. "Morello," she said. The word was quiet, almost conversational. He still said nothing. "As in," she started. "Yes," Serafina answered for him. "As in his wife." Mafia. The night that would lead to this one had begun 11 years ago in a building that no longer existed. The Aldecoa warehouse sat on the edge of the Port Morris waterfront in the South Bronx, one of 4 properties held under a shell company that Cassian and 2 partners had established with $40,000 in cash they had accumulated through 3 years of low-level collections work, cargo theft, and 1 instance of highly profitable insurance fraud. The warehouse was cold in winter and oppressively hot in summer, and smelled permanently of brine and diesel fuel. And for 2 years it served as the operational center of what was not yet an empire and would not have been called one by anyone present at the time. Serafina Morello. Serafina Vasquez. Before the marriage, which had taken place in a civil ceremony attended by 7 people in a judge's office in Queens, ran the finances from a desk in the northeast corner of the warehouse's upper office. The desk was a door laid across 2 sawhorses. The computer was 3 years old and ran software she had pirated because the legitimate version cost $400 they didn't have. She was 24 years old and had a degree in accounting from Baruch College that she had earned while working 2 jobs and sending $300 a month back to her mother in Yonkers, and she brought to the management of Cassian's nascent criminal enterprise the same meticulous, almost aggressive competence she had brought to every financial structure she had ever been handed. She was not romantic about what she was doing. She did not tell herself stories. She understood that the money moving through the accounts she managed had blood somewhere in its history, and she understood that the men who delivered it were capable of violence she had witnessed firsthand on 2 occasions, and she understood that the legal framework she was constructing, the LLCs, the shell companies, the layered ownership structures that moved cash from the street into legitimate business revenue, were not just clever accounting, but a form of complicity. She chose it anyway. She chose it because she believed in Cassian, not in a soft, unexamined way. She was constitutionally incapable of soft, unexamined belief in anything, but in the specific way she believed in systems that worked. She had watched him operate. She had watched him negotiate with men twice his age and 3 times his experience and come away with better terms than anyone expected. She had watched him absorb information, process it without visible effort, and produce decisions that were consistently right at a rate that felt less like intelligence and more like a different category of perception. He was 26 and he was already operating on a level that the people around him couldn't fully see. She could see it. She was one of the very few. And so she sat at her sawhorse desk in the cold warehouse and built him a financial architecture that would outlast everything else, because she was good at her work and she believed the work was worth doing, and also because she loved him in the particular way she was capable of loving, without performance, without sentimentality, with a bedrock, structural commitment that she would have been embarrassed to articulate, but that expressed itself daily in the precision and the loyalty and the absolute refusal to do anything halfway. He loved her too. That part was true, and it mattered that it was true. In those early years, in the warehouse and the diner booths and the small apartment in Mott Haven, where they slept with a loaded Glock on the nightstand because twice in 6 months men had come for them, he loved her in a way that was honest and bone-deep and practical. Not poetic. He was not a poetic man, but real. He brought her coffee at 2 in the morning without being asked because he knew she would still be at the desk. He learned the difference between the nights when she needed to talk through what she was carrying and the nights when she needed silence. When her mother had a health scare, nothing serious, a cardiac arrhythmia that resolved itself, he drove to Yonkers at 4 in the morning without her having to ask, without making it a negotiation, without requiring anything in return. She remembered that drive. She remembered it specifically. The way the city thinned out as they moved north on the highway, and the sky turned that particular pre-dawn color between black and gray, and how he drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting over hers on the center console, and how neither of them said anything for 45 minutes, and how the silence between them had felt, at that particular moment, like the most solid thing in her life. She thought about that drive sometimes in the years that came after, during the slow deterioration that she had watched and documented with the same meticulous attention she brought to every other thing. She thought about it not with grief exactly, but with the particular ache of someone who has held a very precise memory against the present and found the distance between them impossible to measure. The Morello organization took its first major leap in year 3, when a strategic alliance with the Conti family's distribution network opened up the eastern seaboard in a way that none of them had fully anticipated. Suddenly, the money was different. Not just more, different in character, different in velocity, moving at a rate and volume that required an entirely new financial architecture. Serafina built it. Over the course of 8 months, working sometimes 20 hours a day, she constructed a network of legitimate business holdings through which the organization's revenue could move without attracting the attention that would have been fatal. She registered companies in Delaware and Nevada and Wyoming, jurisdictions she had researched with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. She established banking relationships through intermediaries. She structured ownership arrangements that distributed control across multiple holding entities in ways that were technically compliant and functionally untraceable. She negotiated with lawyers she had vetted personally, not through referrals because she understood that a referral was a chain and chains had weak links. The properties she chose for the organization's legitimate fronts were not random. Hotels that occupied strategic real estate positions in cities where the organization had operational interests. A chain of shipping companies whose port access would be administratively useful. 2 mid-tier casino operations in jurisdictions with favorable licensing structures. An investment firm that could move capital across borders with the kind of plausible legitimacy that came from actual clients and actual returns, not just paperwork. She chose well. Every single choice was right, not just at the time, but in the years that followed, when the landscape shifted and competitors collapsed and the holdings she had selected appreciated both in value and in strategic utility. She had not been lucky, she had been right, and she had been invisible. That was part of the design initially. In those years, visibility was danger. The fewer names that appeared in documents, the better. Serafina's name appeared nowhere in the public-facing structures of the legitimate businesses. Her ownership interests were held through holding entities buried 3 and 4 layers deep in corporate structures that she had designed to be, among other things, impenetrable. What she had not fully calculated, or rather, what she had calculated and then set aside, in one of the very few instances in her life where she allowed herself to prefer one truth over another, was what that invisibility would mean when the man she had built it for decided she was no longer part of the picture. She saw it coming. Of course she saw it coming. She saw it in the way he began attending certain events without her, in the slight change in posture, when he took calls in the other room, in the shift, barely perceptible, in the quality of his attention when they were together, the way the present tense of him had begun to feel like it was happening somewhere else. She ran the numbers. She was always running numbers. She cataloged the shifts the way she cataloged everything, methodically, without self-deception, with the clear-eyed exhaustion of a person who is watching something collapse and cannot stop calculating the rate of descent. She heard about Vanessa before she saw her. The name surfaced twice in conversations she was not supposed to be part of, once through Marco, who had the decency to look uncomfortable, and once through a junior accountant named Torres, who mentioned it without realizing he was confirming something rather than introducing it. Serafina said nothing both times. She filed the information. She met Vanessa once, briefly, at a function she had agreed to attend 6 weeks before learning what she now knew. They were introduced by a mutual acquaintance who clearly had no idea about the geometry of the situation. They spoke for 4 minutes. Serafina remembered everything about those 4 minutes. The specific words, the ambient noise level, the quality of the other woman's attention, which was sharp and careful and not unkind. She did not hate her. That would have been a waste of energy. She reserved her feelings for people who had made choices, and Vanessa Vale was not, at that point, fully aware of the choice she was making. Cassian was. 3 months after the Vanessa situation became undeniable, Serafina had a conversation with a lawyer named Edith Crane, who operated a boutique corporate law firm in a brownstone on the Upper East Side, and whose discretion came highly recommended by 3 people whose recommendations Serafina trusted. She told Edith Crane what she had. She told her what she needed. She told her how much time she was willing to take. "This will work," Edith Crane said, after reviewing the documentation Serafina had brought. "But you need to be patient." "How patient?" Serafina asked. "A year, maybe 2. "Tell me what I need to do." She did everything Edith Crane told her to do. She did it exactly, completely, without shortcuts. She spent 17 months quietly consolidating the legal structures she had built over the previous 6 years, not in a way that altered their function. She was not sabotaging anything, was not stealing anything, but in a way that made their true ownership unambiguous on paper for the first time. The hotels, the casinos, the shipping companies, the investment firm, the chain of title, when traced, did not end at Cassian Morello. It never had. It ended at Serafina Vasquez Morello, through holding structures she had established in her own interest during the original construction of the network, long before any of the current complications had existed. She had not been dishonest. She had simply been thorough. Cassian had never asked. He had trusted her to build it correctly and had not examined the architecture himself, because examining the architecture himself would have required a level of financial literacy he had never prioritized. He had Serafina for that. And then, when he decided he no longer had Serafina, he had Torres and a team of CPAs who were competent, but who were working with documents that Serafina had designed to show them only what she needed them to see. She had spent 17 months and 1 week making sure every relevant document was in order. Then she had gotten an invitation to the Black Crest Gala and accepted it. In the ballroom now, in the present, after the word wife had landed and spread across the room like something spilled on white fabric, the silence was the specific silence of 400 people calculating simultaneously. Vanessa had gone very still. She was not a woman who allowed her face to tell stories she hadn't chosen to tell, and Serafina recognized that quality because she possessed it herself, and for one precise moment, she felt something almost like kinship for the other woman, a recognition of shared mechanism, if not shared situation. They were both standing in the same room with their faces entirely controlled, while very different versions of an internal collapse proceeded beneath the surface. The difference was that Serafina had chosen to be here. Vanessa had not. "We need to take this somewhere private," Cassian said. His voice was low, and under the flatness of it, there was something that Serafina had not heard in a very long time. Something thin and strained, the specific sound of a man whose control of a situation is slipping and who is not yet ready to acknowledge that it is already gone. "No," she said again. "Serafina." "I said no, Cassian." She moved toward the stage. The stage was elevated perhaps 18 inches above the ballroom floor, a low platform where the quartet had been playing and where the evening speakers had been scheduled to address the crowd before dinner. She stepped up without hurrying, without drama, without looking back to gauge his reaction. She could feel his reaction from across the room without looking. She had known him for 11 years. She turned to face the crowd. 400 faces. She knew some of them well. She knew many of them by reputation. She knew several of them by their financial habits, their debt structures, their exposure points, knowledge she had accumulated in the course of managing the legitimate business empire whose existence most of these people had never fully understood. She reached into her clutch. She removed a small folded document. She held it in her left hand without opening it. "My name is Serafina Morello," she said. Her voice filled the room without effort. "I've been quiet for a long time," she said. "I want to be clear that the quiet was not weakness. I was working, and tonight I'm finished." In the back of the room, near the bar, a man in a gray suit, Philip Stroud, one of the organization's senior financial advisors, a man who had worked adjacent to the empire's legitimate structures for 7 years without ever meeting Serafina in person, had gone the color of old concrete, because Philip Stroud understood financial architecture, and he had just recognized where this was going. Serafina opened the document. "I'd like to introduce certain facts into this room," she said, "that I believe the people in this room have a right to know." She paused. Not for drama. She was not performing. She paused because what came next required the specific quality of attention that came from a room that had fully stopped. The room had fully stopped. "The hotels," she said, "the casino properties, the maritime holdings, the Castellan Group investment portfolio." She listed each one by name, and she watched the color leave faces across the room as she did. These assets, which collectively represent the majority of the financial infrastructure through which the Morello organization's legitimate operations are conducted, I own them. I have always owned them. The documentation is here. It is current. It has been verified by 3 independent legal firms in the past 60 days, and copies have been sent this evening to the relevant regulatory and administrative offices. Cassian moved. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of his steps on the marble, quick, the specific cadence of a man who has lost the measured control of his movements. She looked up. He had crossed half the room. His face was something she had never seen before in all the years of knowing him. Not rage. Rage was too simple. It was the face of a man standing at the edge of something he had not believed existed until this moment, looking down. "Stop," he said. He had said the word expecting it to land the way it had always landed, like a hand on a surface, like a wall. It did not land that way. She looked at him, and she kept her voice the way she had kept it all evening, clear, steady, carrying nothing that she had not chosen to carry. "I'm not going to stop, Cassian." He was 15 feet away, then 10. "There are people in this room," she continued, turning back to the crowd without breaking from his approach, "who have financial relationships with these assets, who sit on boards, who have contractual obligations tied to these properties. You deserve to know who you are actually doing business with, because it was never him. It was always me." Cassian stopped 8 feet from the stage. For one moment, one precise, terrible, irrevocable moment, they looked at each other across 8 feet of charged air and 400 witnesses, and everything that had ever been between them was present in that moment. All of it. The warehouse and the Yonkers Drive and the loaded Glock on the nightstand and the 2 years of slow erosion and the 17 months of preparation and the decision she had made standing alone in Edith Crane's office on the Upper East Side. And then Cassian Morello, for the first time in 14 years of running one of the most feared criminal organizations on the Eastern Seaboard, said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Serafina looked at him for one more beat. Then she looked back at the room. "I'll be in contact with each of you individually through appropriate legal channels in the coming days," she said. "I apologize for the disruption to your evening." She stepped down from the stage. She did not look at Cassian as she passed him. She did not look at Vanessa, who had not moved from where she stood and whose face now was something Serafina chose not to study because she had no appetite for that particular kind of damage. She walked toward the side corridor that led to the hotel's administrative wing, where Edith Crane and 2 associates were waiting in a conference room they had booked 3 weeks ago under a corporate name that bore no connection to any of the relevant parties. She was 6 steps from the corridor entrance when she heard Cassian's voice behind her. "Serafina." She stopped. She did not turn. "This isn't over," he said. And underneath the words, underneath the taut, controlled surface of them, there was something that was not quite a threat and not quite a plea, and occupied the specific, awful space between those 2 things. She stood with her back to him for 1 breath, 2, 3. "No," she said quietly, to the corridor ahead of her, and the night beyond it, and every version of the future she had spent 17 months building. "It's just starting." She walked through the corridor door. It closed behind her. In the ballroom, the silence held. 400 people, suspended in the aftermath of something none of them had expected, and all of them would be calculating for weeks. Until Philip Stroud, standing by the bar in his gray suit, set his glass down very carefully on the counter and took out his phone. He was not the only one. And somewhere in the building, in a conference room on the 14th floor, where 3 lawyers sat with files arranged on a long table and a secure line open to a regulatory office in Washington, the next part of something that had been set in motion 17 months ago was already beginning. Cassian did not know what part that was. That was the problem. That had always been the problem. He was standing in the center of his own ballroom, surrounded by 400 people who were no longer looking at him with admiration, and he did not know what Serafina had filed, or what the Washington line was for, or what else she had put into motion before she walked through those doors tonight. He had built an empire on knowing things. He was now standing at the center of it, knowing nothing, and 3 miles across the city, in a building he did not know existed, a man named Harlan Voss, who had worked with Serafina in the earliest years of the organization and who had disappeared from the scene 8 years ago under circumstances that Cassian had never fully investigated, was looking at his phone, reading a text that said only 2 words: "It's done." He set the phone down on the table in front of him. He picked up a folder. He opened it, and he began to read. The conference room on the 14th floor smelled like cold coffee and recirculated air and the specific tension that accumulates in enclosed spaces where serious people are doing serious things. Serafina sat at the head of the table with her clutch open in front of her and her hands flat on the surface, and she was breathing. Just breathing. In through the nose, 4 counts, out through the mouth, 4 counts. The way she had trained herself to do in the years when breathing correctly was the difference between a functional decision and a catastrophic one. Edith Crane sat to her left. Edith was 53, built narrow and compact, with silver hair cut close to her head and the kind of face that gave nothing away by default. She had been practicing corporate law for 26 years, and she had the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough rooms like this one to have stopped being surprised by any of them. "It went as projected," Edith said. "Yes," Serafina said. "The regulatory filing confirmation came through at 9:47. That's 11 minutes ago." "I know." Edith's associate, a young man named Garrett, whose last name Serafina had never bothered to retain, was typing on a laptop at the far end of the table. The secure line to Washington had been active for the past 20 minutes. A low hum of held connection. No voice on it yet, but the line open and waiting like a breath not yet taken. "He'll move on the accounts," Serafina said. "Tonight, before midnight." "We anticipated that," Edith said. "How long do we have before he can actually execute anything?" "The holding structures have freeze provisions built in. Any unilateral transfer attempt triggers an automatic review period, 72 hours minimum, longer if he tries to contest the ownership filing. And the lawyers he uses? Brannigan Associates. They'll tell him 72 hours is optimistic. They'll tell him correctly," Edith said. Serafina looked at the table for a moment. The surface was dark wood, polished to the point where she could see a dim reflection of herself in it. A pale, precise ghost of a woman in an ivory dress, upside down and slightly distorted, which felt appropriate. "He's going to come after Harlan," she said. Edith's expression did not change. "Harlan is covered." "Covered isn't the same as safe." "No," Edith agreed. "It isn't." Serafina picked up her phone. No messages from Harlan. She had not expected any. Harlan Voss communicated on his own schedule and by his own methods, which was one of the things that made him difficult and one of the things that made him essential. He had worked alongside her during the warehouse years, not for Cassian, never for Cassian, always for the financial side of the operation, which had always been hers in practice even before it became hers in law. He had disappeared from the scene in year 4, quietly, at her suggestion, because she had already begun to understand, even then, the shape of what was coming, and she had needed someone positioned outside the organization's awareness. 8 years was a long time to be patient. She set the phone down. "When Cassian calls Brannigan tonight," she said, "what's the first thing they're going to advise?" "Negotiation," Edith said. "They'll tell him the fastest resolution is a settlement structure." "And when he tells them settlement isn't on the table?" Edith looked at her steadily. "Then they'll start talking about litigation timelines. 2 years minimum. Possibly 4. 4 years," Serafina said, if he fights it properly. She nodded slowly. 4 years of contested litigation over an empire she had built, and a man who had replaced her. She thought about that, turned it over, examined its weight, set it back down. He won't wait 4 years, she said. He'll do something before that. Yes, Edith said, he will. Neither of them said what that something might be, because both of them already knew, and saying it in this room on this night would not make it more or less true. Serafina stood. She smoothed the front of her dress with both hands, a gesture so automatic she wasn't aware of it, and she walked to the window. 14 floors below, the front entrance of the Harmon Continental was emptying in a way that was not the gradual drift of guests ending a pleasant evening, but the specific directional exodus of people who need to make phone calls in private. She could see the black cars repositioning. She could see the particular cluster of men near the east entrance who were not guests. 3 of Cassian's outer security detail standing in a tight formation, phones out, heads bent together. They were not looking for her. Not yet. They were looking at each other, which meant the conversation in the ballroom was still resolving, which meant Cassian had not yet issued the order that she knew was coming. When it came, it would not be an order he issued in the ballroom. He was too controlled for that. He would wait until he was in his car or in whatever room he moved to after this, the presidential suite on the 9th floor, which she knew he had reserved because she had checked the hotel's reservation system 3 weeks ago through a contact whose access she had not disclosed to anyone. And he would make the calls from there, first to Brannigan, then to his operational people. Then, she suspected, to Marco. Marco was the variable she had spent the most time on. Marco DeLuca had known both of them, had stood beside Cassian through the warehouse years and the gang wars and the expansion, had also known Serafina in those same years, had seen what she did, understood what she was, held in his memory the version of the organization that existed before the prosperity had warped everything. She did not know where Marco's loyalty would settle when the lines became clear. She had some reason for optimism and better reason for caution, and she had not built anything in the last 17 months on the assumption of his cooperation. She turned from the window. "I'm going to go," she said. Edith nodded. "The car is on Lexington. The driver knows the route. Call me when Brannigan picks up." "Of course." She picked up her clutch. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back at the table, at the files and the laptop and the open secure line and the 2 people who had spent months helping her dismantle and reclaim 11 years of her own life. "Thank you, Edith," she said. It was not a thing she said easily. Edith knew that. "Go," Edith said. Not unkindly. She went. Downstairs, in the presidential suite on the 9th floor, Cassian was standing at the window doing what Serafina had predicted he would do, looking at the city with a glass of something he wasn't drinking and a phone in his other hand that he wasn't yet using. Marco stood 6 feet behind him. The suite was otherwise empty. He had sent the other 2 men into the corridor and closed the door, and now it was just the 2 of them, and the city and the silence that had followed them up from the ballroom. "How long?" Cassian said. His voice was flat, different from the flatness in the ballroom. That had been the controlled flatness of public performance. This was the flatness of a man scraping the bottom of his own composure. "How long did she have this ready?" he said. It wasn't a question so much as a sentence that needed finishing. Marco said nothing. Cassian turned. "Marco." "I don't know," Marco said. "Guess." Marco looked at him. He was a large man, broad through the chest, with a face built for bad weather, heavy brow, deep-set eyes, a jaw that had absorbed 2 breaks over the years and healed slightly wrong both times. He was not a man who performed discomfort. When he was uncomfortable, the discomfort was visible in the specific, controlled way he held his body, which was the way he was holding it now. "A long time," Marco said, "the way the documents are structured. That's not something you put together in 6 months. That's years." Cassian absorbed this. His face went through something that was not quite pain and not quite fury, and landed somewhere between the 2, in the specific register of a man confronting the fact that he has been outmaneuvered by someone he underestimated. "I need to know everything she did," he said. "Every contact she made, every lawyer, every filing, every—" "Cassian?" "Every movement, every—" Cassian. Marco's voice was firm. Not loud, just firm, in the specific way he had used it twice before in 19 years, and both times Cassian had stopped and listened. He stopped. He looked at Marco. "You're not going to find it tonight," Marco said. "She built this over years. Whatever she built, it's finished. The filing is done. You can't undo the filing tonight." The muscle in Cassian's jaw moved. Once. "I need to know who helped her," he said. "Yes," Marco agreed. "You do." "Harlan," Cassian said. The name came out of him like a stone thrown at a wall. "Harlan Voss." Marco's expression shifted slightly, barely, but Cassian had known him for 19 years. "What?" Cassian said. "Nothing." "Don't give me nothing, Marco. Your face just said something." A pause. 3 seconds. 4. "Harlan's been off the board for 8 years, Marco said carefully. "Off our board," Cassian said. "Not hers." The distinction landed in the room, and Marco did not argue it. "Find him," Cassian said. "And when I do?" Cassian looked at him. "I want to talk to him." Marco nodded slowly. There was something in the nod that Cassian either did not notice or chose not to address. A reservation, small and deliberate. A man committing to the letter of an instruction while quietly reserving judgment on its spirit. "What about Vanessa?" Marco asked. The name sat in the air between them for a moment, like something Cassian would have preferred not to have introduced into the room. "What about her?" he said. "She left the ballroom, alone. She's not answering my calls." "She's not your problem," Cassian said. "She's staying in the hotel," Marco said. "Suite 712. If she starts making calls to people we don't control, she's not going to make calls," Cassian said. "She's not that kind of problem." "You don't know what kind of problem she is tonight," Marco said quietly. "She found out in front of 400 people that the man she's been with for 2 years has a wife. That changes a person's math." Cassian looked at the city again. He set the untouched glass on the window ledge. "I'll handle Vanessa," he said. Marco said nothing. "I said I'll handle it." "I heard you," Marco said. And the space between what he said and what he didn't say was something both men felt, and neither acknowledged. Suite 712 was smaller than the presidential suite and higher than the ballroom and quieter than either. Vanessa had not turned on the lights when she came in. She sat in the chair nearest the window in her red dress, shoes off, feet on the floor, and she was very still. She was not crying. She had considered it and set it aside the way she set aside other things that were not immediately useful. What she was doing instead was thinking in the specific, rapid, sequential way she thought when something had gone wrong and she needed to understand the geometry of it before she could figure out where to stand. He had a wife, not an ex-wife, not a separated wife. A wife. Present tense, legally intact, documented and verified by the expression on his face when that woman walked through the ballroom doors, which was the expression of a man looking at something he had not fully believed would materialize. 2 years. She had given him 2 years. Not blindly. She had known the kind of man he was, had made her own calculations, had decided the terms were acceptable, but she had made those calculations based on the information she had been given, and the information she had been given was not complete. And that fact was not an abstraction. It was concrete. It was sitting in this chair with her, in the dark, in its red dress. She thought about the things he had told her and the things he had not told her, and she began the meticulous, uncomfortable work of sorting them into 2 piles. The pile of things she had known, or reasonably should have known, grew faster than she wanted it to. That was honest. She was trying to be honest. But the wife. That one did not go in the pile she should have known. That one had been kept from her deliberately, with effort, over a sustained period of time. That was not omission. That was architecture. Her phone was on the table beside the chair. It had rung 3 times since she came in. Marco twice. A number she didn't recognize once. She had not answered. She picked it up now, not to answer. To look at the screen, at the list of unanswered calls, at the time in the corner, 11:14 p.m. And at the notification she had not yet opened, which was an email from an address she didn't recognize, sent 40 minutes ago, with a subject line that read, "Things you should know before tomorrow." She looked at that subject line for a long moment. She opened the email. She read it. Then she read it again. Then she set the phone very carefully on the table and looked at the dark window with a completely new expression on her face. Not the controlled blank of a woman suppressing what she felt, but the specific, focused expression of a woman who has just received information that changes what she intends to do. Across the city, in a building that appeared on no organizational chart and no property record associated with the Morello name, Harlan Voss was on his second cup of coffee and his fourth hour of waiting. He was 51 years old, built wiry and compact, with gray at his temples, and the kind of stillness that came from years of making himself small and quiet in rooms where other people were too loud. He had been good at numbers once, not with Serafina's architectural precision, but with a practitioner's competence that had made him useful in the early years. Now he was good at other things. Specifically, he was good at existing without being found. He had not been found in 8 years. He was beginning to wonder if tonight would change that. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A number he recognized as one of Cassian's outer network. Not inner circle, but adjacent enough to be worth noting. He did not answer. He set the phone face down and looked at the folder on the table in front of him. It was thicker than it had been an hour ago. He had been adding to it methodically, in the manner of a man completing a task he had been building toward for a very long time. The folder contained things that Serafina did not have. That was by design. They had divided the work years ago. She would control the financial architecture, the legal structures, the documented foundation of legitimate ownership. He would control something else, something that could not be put in a filing, something that lived in the memory of people who had been present for events that no one had documented, because documenting them would have been fatal. He had 31 separate accounts. 31 people who had been present at 31 separate moments in the history of the Morello organization's rise, who had seen things and who had agreed. Through varying combinations of conscience and self-interest, and in a few cases, the specific motivation that comes from having been badly wronged by a man who assumed his victims stayed quiet, to provide documented statements when the time was right. The time was right. He picked up his phone. Not the one that had just buzzed, that one he left face down. His second phone, the one with the clean number. He dialed. 3 rings. "It's Harlan," he said when the line picked up. "Tell them we're moving to phase 2. A pause on the line, then, "All 31? "All 31, he said. "Tonight." He hung up. He looked at the folder. He thought about Cassian Morello, who was 11 years younger than him, and who had, in year 4 of the organization's existence, made a decision about Harlan's future that had seemed, at the time, like a simple administrative choice, a restructuring, a reduction in exposure, a quiet removal from the active operational picture. Cassian had not thought much about it. He never thought much about the people he moved out of the frame. That was the mistake. Harlan stood. He stretched his back, which ached the way it always ached after hours at a table, and he walked to the window and looked at the city. The same city Cassian was looking at from the 9th floor of the Harmon Continental. The same skyline, the same midnight light, the same grid of streets below. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he did not recognize. He answered. "Mr. Voss," said a voice he also did not recognize. Female, composed, with the specific measured cadence of someone reading from a prepared statement rather than speaking spontaneously. "Who is this?" he said. "My name is not important," the voice said. "What's important is that Cassian Morello has been given your location." Harlan was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "How?" he said. "Someone inside the legal team," the voice said. "It happened in the last 30 minutes. We believe it was inadvertent. A communication that should have been encrypted was not. We caught it, but not before it went through." Harlan looked at the door, at the window, at the folder on the table. "How long do I have?" he said. "We don't know," the voice said. "That's why I'm calling." He set down the clean phone and picked up the other one, the one with the buzzing number he had left face down, and he looked at the screen. The number had called 4 times in the last 6 minutes. He put both phones in his jacket pocket. He picked up the folder. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle, and did the specific, rapid mental calculation of a man assessing risk against. Harlan's hand was still on the door handle when the knock came from the other side. Not a polite knock, not the knock of someone who expected to wait. 3 strikes, flat-palmed, the kind of knock that announced rather than requested, and in the half second between hearing it and processing it, Harlan did the arithmetic that his body had already completed before his mind caught up. The folder under his left arm, the distance to the window, the drop from the second floor to the alley below, the condition of his knees at 51 years old, and the specific, final calculation that told him the window was not going to work. He stepped back from the door. The knock came again. Then a voice. "Harlan, it's Marco." He stood in the middle of the room with the folder pressed against his ribs, and he breathed once, carefully, and he thought about what Marco DeLuca being at his door meant versus what Cassian's operational people being at his door would have meant, and he decided the difference was still meaningful, even if he couldn't be certain how meaningful. He opened the door. Marco stood alone in the hallway. No one behind him, no one visible in either direction of the corridor. He was wearing the same tuxedo from the Gala, jacket now open, tie loosened by exactly one pull. He looked at Harlan the way a man looks at someone he's relieved to find alive, which was its own kind of information. "You need to move," Marco said. "Right now." "How did you find this address?" Harlan said. "Same way Cassian did." "Now move." Harlan looked at him for one more second, not because he was undecided, but because he was memorizing the expression on Marco's face, filing it, because information gathered in threshold moments was information that lasted. And then he stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind him. "The folder," Marco said, looking at it. "Comes with me," Harlan said. "I know," Marco said. "I'm not asking for it. I'm noting it exists." They moved down the hallway. Marco's pace was fast, but not running. The specific controlled speed of a man who understood that running announced a problem to anyone watching, and walking fast merely suggested purpose. "Where are we going?" Harlan said. "Car downstairs?" "Then somewhere Cassian doesn't have a line on." "Does such a place exist?" "Tonight it does," Marco said. "Tomorrow I don't know." They reached the stairwell. Marco pushed through the door without slowing, and Harlan followed, and they went down 2 flights in a silence that was full of the things neither of them was saying yet, which were the things that mattered most. In the car, a gray sedan with plates Harlan didn't recognize, Marco drove and Harlan sat in the passenger seat with the folder on his lap and watched the city move past the window and tried to construct a version of events in which Marco's presence here was something other than what it appeared to be. He couldn't construct it. "Serafina doesn't know about the leak," Harlan said. It wasn't a question. "She's been notified," Marco said. "By you?" "By me." Harlan looked at him. "Since when?" Marco kept his eyes on the road. "Since a while." The answer was incomplete, and both men knew it, and Marco did not offer more. Harlan did not push. There was a conversation coming that required a specific kind of space, and the inside of a moving car at midnight was not that space, and both of them were old enough to know it. Serafina's phone rang at 11:41 p.m. She was in the back of the car on Lexington, 10 minutes from the apartment she had been using for the past 3 months. Not her primary residence, which Cassian knew, but a secondary address held under the name of a corporate entity he had no connection to. She had been looking at her own reflection in the dark window, not thinking about anything in particular, which was itself unusual enough that she had noticed it. Her mind was normally always moving. The stillness meant something. She hadn't decided what yet. She looked at the screen. Edith. "Tell me," she said. "The leak originated from Garrett's workstation," Edith said. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it was the specific quality of a person delivering news they are not comfortable with. He used an unencrypted channel to confirm the regulatory filing to a contact at the administrative office. The confirmation included the address of the supporting documentation storage site. "Which is Harlan's address," Serafina said. "Yes." She was quiet. "Is Garrett—" "He's here," Edith said. He didn't understand what he was exposing. It was a procedural error, not— "I know what it was," Serafina said. Her voice was flat. Not angry yet. Past the temperature where anger lived into the colder register beyond it. "Where's Harlan now?" "Marco has him." The name landed differently than expected. "Marco?" "Yes." "Marco DeLuca?" "Yes." She looked at the dark window, at the city moving past, at her own face in the reflection, which was the face she wore when she was processing something that required recalibration of a significant number of assumptions simultaneously. "How long?" she said quietly. "I don't know when it started," Edith said. "I don't have that information. But you know he's been in contact with you." A pause. "He reached out 6 weeks ago. I should have told you immediately. I made a judgment call that I am not confident was correct." Serafina closed her eyes. She kept them closed for 3 full seconds. "Where are they going?" she said. "I have an address," Edith said. "Harlan texted it just now." "Send it to me." "Serafina." "Send it to me, Edith." The address came through 30 seconds later. She looked at it. She told the driver the new destination. She put the phone in her lap and looked at nothing and let the recalibration happen without trying to steer it, because trying to steer a recalibration before it was complete was how you made bad decisions. Marco had been in contact with Edith for 6 weeks. 6 weeks ago, the filing was in its final stages. The regulatory submission was being prepared. The list of people who knew the complete shape of what she had built was very short, and Marco was not on it, had never been on it, had been explicitly excluded from it because he was Cassian's man, and had been Cassian's man for 19 years, and she had not allowed herself to romanticize what that meant. But Marco had come for Harlan tonight. Marco had moved before Cassian's operational people. Marco had been the one to pull Harlan out, which meant either he was running a parallel operation for Cassian, getting to Harlan before Cassian to control what Harlan said, or he was doing something else. Something that didn't fit the 19-year frame. She didn't know which. That was the problem. She had spent 17 months building a structure in which she knew the answer to every question that mattered. She had been meticulous. She had been thorough. She had not been thorough enough. The building Marco drove to was a commercial property in Greenpoint, a small printing company that operated during the day and was dark and locked at this hour, owned by a man named Augusto, who owed Marco a favor of the kind that was paid in the form of keys and no questions. The three of them stood in the main printing floor, surrounded by silent machinery and the smell of ink and paper. And Harlan set the folder on a flat surface, and Marco stood 6 feet away with his hands in his jacket pockets, and they looked at each other in the bad overhead light. "Talk," Harlan said. "I've been watching what Serafina built," Marco said. "For longer than 6 weeks. Edith's timeline is incomplete." "How long?" 2 years, Marco said. Maybe a little more." Harlan was quiet. "I didn't interfere," Marco said. "I didn't tell Cassian. I watched. I made sure certain things didn't get in the way. The security rotation the night she met with the Delaware registrar, that was me. The surveillance gap at the Upper East Side office when she first met with Edith, also me." "You cleared her path," Harlan said. "When I could, without making it visible." "Why?" The word was simple and direct, and Marco took a breath before answering it, which was the most human thing Harlan had seen him do in the 12 years he had known him. "Because I was there," Marco said, "at the warehouse, in the early years. I watched what she did, and I watched what he did with it, and I watched what he did to her, and I made a decision." "You were loyal to him for 19 years, Harlan said. "I was," Marco said. "And then I wasn't." The door opened behind them. Both men turned. Serafina stood in the entrance of the printing floor. She had taken her hair down at some point in the car. It fell around her shoulders now, dark and loose, and she was still in the ivory dress, which was wrong for this space, in a way that made the space feel wrong rather than making her feel wrong, which was a thing about her that had not changed in all the years Harlan had known her. She looked at Marco. Marco looked at her. "How long?" she said. "I told him 2 years," Marco said. "Closer to 3. She absorbed this. Her face moved through something. Not surprise exactly, because she was already past surprise, but the specific recalibration of a person adjusting a model that had been built without a variable that turns out to matter significantly. "You moved Harlan tonight," she said. "Yes." "Before Cassian's people." 20 minutes before, Marco said. "Maybe less." "And the folder," she said, looking at Harlan. "Intact," Harlan said. She walked to the table. She looked at the folder without touching it. Then she looked up at Marco. I need to know what Cassian knows, she said. Right now. Everything he's been told tonight, every call he's made, every instruction he's given. He called Brannigan at 11. He's been told about the 72-hour freeze. He's not accepting it. Marco paused. He called 2 of his operational people. I know the names. They've been given a task. What task? She said. Marco looked at her steadily. Finding you. She didn't move. Finding me or finding leverage? The same thing, Marco said. To him right now, those are the same thing. She turned away from the table. She walked 3 steps and stopped and stood with her back to both of them, and Harlan watched her shoulders rise once with a breath she was controlling. There's something else, Marco said. She turned around. The quality of his voice had changed. Something in it that Harlan noticed and Serafina noticed simultaneously, the specific drop in register that precedes information that reorders everything. Tell me, she said. The 31 accounts, Marco said. Harlan's witnesses. Harlan went very still. 3 of them have been contacted tonight, Marco said. In the last 2 hours. Not by Cassian's people. By someone else. Who? Harlan said. I don't know who, but I know the approach. They were offered money, a significant amount. And they were told something. I don't know what they were told, but whatever it was, 2 of the 3 have gone dark. Not answering, not reachable. The room was quiet for a long moment. 2 out of 3, Serafina said. That I know of, Marco said. I don't know about the other 28. Harlan opened the folder. His hands moved through the pages with the practiced speed of someone who had organized this material and knew exactly where everything lived, and he found the 2 pages he needed and looked at them, and then looked up with an expression that had crossed from concern into something harder. Graves and Tolan, he said. Those are the 2 who went dark? I believe so, Marco said, based on the contact timing. Graves was the shipping manifest, Harlan said. 11 years of falsified cargo documentation. That account alone could support a federal inquiry. And Tolan, Serafina said. Harlan looked at her. Tolan was present for the Aldecoa incident. The name of the incident landed in the room, and for a moment no one said anything, because the Aldecoa incident was the one thing in the history of the organization that existed completely outside the financial architecture, completely outside the legal structure, completely outside the documented record. The one thing that had no paper, no filing, no corporate entity standing between it and the raw reality of what had happened. It was also the one thing that Serafina had always kept at a precise arm's length from her own involvement because it had happened in year 2, before she had understood the full nature of what she had committed herself to, and she had not been present, and she had told herself for 9 years that not being present was enough distance. Tolan's account had been insurance, a piece of documentation that could only be used if everything else failed. If Tolan had been turned, but if whoever had contacted him tonight had offered enough or threatened enough or explained enough, then what Tolan knew was no longer insurance. It was exposure. Someone knew about Tolan, Serafina said. Her voice was very quiet. Someone knew about all of them, Harlan said. She looked at him. How? The list, Harlan said. He was looking at the folder. He was looking at it the way a person looks at something they are realizing is compromised. The full list of 31 accounts. It was stored. He stopped. Where? She said. He looked up. On the secure drive, the one I set up 18 months ago, the one Edith's office had remote access to. The sentence ended, and then its implications spread through the room like water spreading across a floor. Slow at first, then faster, finding every low point. Edith's office. Garrett's workstation. Garrett, who had made a procedural error tonight. Garrett, who had used an unencrypted channel. Garrett, who had been in Edith's office for 8 months, hired through a referral that Edith had not examined as thoroughly as she should have because she had been examining everything else. Serafina's face went through something that Harlan had never seen on it in 11 years. It was not panic. She was not capable of panic in any form he recognized, but it was the closest thing to it that her particular architecture permitted. A brief, total suspension of forward motion, the face of a person whose foundation has just been revealed to contain a crack they did not put there. Garrett, she said, we don't know, Marco started. Who referred him to Edith, she said. Not to Marco. To herself? The question directed inward at the version of herself that had reviewed Edith's staffing and approved the security protocols and had allowed herself to believe, that the people around her were as meticulous as she was. She picked up her phone. She called Edith. 4 rings, 5. Edith answered on the 6th. I know, Edith said immediately, before Serafina could speak. I've been looking at his access logs for the past 20 minutes. He pulled files from the secure drive 6 times in the last 8 weeks. I didn't flag it because his access level. Who referred him to you? Serafina said. Silence. Edith. A firm in Baltimore, Edith said. We've used them for placement before. They've always been... The firm's name, Serafina said. She heard Edith move. Papers. A keyboard. Hardcastle Staffing, Edith said. Harlan made a sound. It was a small sound, barely audible, the kind of sound a person makes when something clicks into place in the worst possible configuration. Serafina looked at him. Hardcastle, he said. That's... Cassian used them for placement 3 years ago. 2 of his administrative people came through Hardcastle. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the wall. Hardcastle had placed Garrett in Edith's office. Garrett had accessed the secure drive 8 weeks ago, 6 times, pulling the witness list and whatever else lived in those files. Cassian had known. Not everything, not the financial architecture, not the legal filing. Those had clearly surprised him tonight. But the witnesses, the 31 accounts, the Aldecoa exposure. He had known about those. He had known, and he had waited, and he had not moved until tonight because tonight was when she moved first, and he had been positioned to respond with something she had not anticipated because she had not known he had it. She had spent 17 months being thorough. He had spent some portion of those months being thorough too. How many of the 31? She said. Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost something. How many are reachable right now? Harlan opened the folder again. He moved through it fast. I can confirm 8 as of 2 hours ago. The others I'd need to... Do it now, she said. Right now, tonight, from this room. Call every number on that list. If they've been turned, then I need to know that tonight, she said. Not tomorrow, now. Harlan nodded. He took out his phone. Marco had moved to the edge of the room. He was standing near the door, not in a way that suggested he was leaving, but in a way that suggested he was providing space. And Serafina looked at him, and he looked back, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The operational people he sent to find me, she said. How much time? Tonight is reconnaissance, Marco said. He won't move operationally until he has a location confirmed. So, tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, Marco said. Maybe sooner. She nodded. She looked at the printing machinery around her. Silent, enormous, built for repetition, built for producing the same thing over and over at scale. And she thought, briefly and without sentiment, about the warehouse in Port Morris, and the sawhorse desk, and the cold and the diesel smell, and the particular quality of the silence at 2 a.m. when it was just her and the numbers, and the conviction that she was building something real. She had been building something real. Someone had been inside it. And across the room, Harlan made his first call, and it rang 6 times and went to voicemail, and he made his second call. And a man answered on the second ring and said 3 words, "Don't call again," and hung up before Harlan could speak. And Serafina heard both of those calls from where she stood, and she did not let her face move. But something in her chest did, something small and structural and load-bearing, something she had not accounted for in any of the 17 months of preparation, something that shifted now with a sound she could only hear from the inside like a crack forming in. The crack finished forming at 12:17 a.m. when Harlan completed his calls. 19 of the 31. 19 witnesses unreachable, dark, gone. Phones disconnected or ringing to voicemail, or answered by people who said variations of the same 3 words in different tones. Don't call again. Some had been bought. Some had been frightened. One, Harlan reported with a flatness in his voice that cost him something, had apparently left the country in the last 6 hours, which meant the approach had begun before the gala, before Serafina stepped through those ballroom doors, before any of tonight had happened. Cassian had been moving while she was moving. That was the thing she could not stop returning to as she stood in the printing floor and listened to Harlan's report and kept her breathing controlled and her face arranged. He had been moving, not reactively, not because she had forced his hand tonight. He had been positioned. Someone had brought him enough of the picture. Not all of it. Not the financial architecture. Not the legal filing. But enough of the witness infrastructure that he had spent weeks quietly dismantling it from underneath while she prepared the structure above. 12 remained. 12 accounts still reachable, still committed, still willing to provide documented testimony when called upon. 12 out of 31. Is it enough? Marco said. He was asking the practical question, not the emotional one, which was the only version of the question worth answering in this room at this hour. For the federal inquiry, Harlan said, 12 verified accounts covering the shipping manifests and the financial misrepresentation documentation. Yes, barely, but yes. Aldecoa, Serafina said. Harlan looked at her. Tolan is dark. He's the only one who is present and documented. There are other ways to establish Aldecoa, she said. Not by tomorrow morning, Harlan said. Not in a form anyone can use. She absorbed this. Without Aldecoa, the federal inquiry was possible but narrow. Financial crimes, regulatory violations, the kind of charges that produced penalties and settlements rather than the kind that produced consequences. The kind of consequences that removed a man permanently from the operational landscape rather than inconvenienced him for a fiscal quarter. Without Aldecoa, Cassian survived this. Diminished, restructured, stripped of the legitimate business architecture, but alive in the way that mattered. Operational. With resources she could not touch and relationships she could not document. And the specific patient fury of a man who had been publicly humiliated in front of 400 witnesses and who would spend whatever time was necessary engineering a response. She picked up her phone. She looked at the screen. 2 missed calls from Edith, one from a number she didn't recognize, and one from a number she recognized immediately and had not expected to see. Vanessa Vale. She stared at that name for 3 full seconds. Give me a minute, she said, not to anyone in particular, and she walked to the far end of the printing floor, past 2 large offset presses, into the relative shadow beyond the main overhead lights, and she called Vanessa back. It rang once. You got my email, Vanessa said. No greeting, no preamble. I saw you sent one, Serafina said. I haven't read it. A pause. Then I'll tell you directly. I've been sitting in that hotel room for 2 hours, and I've been thinking about what I know and what I can prove and what I was willing to accept before tonight and what I'm willing to accept now, and those are different lists. Serafina said nothing. She waited. He told me you were gone, Vanessa said. Not dead, not divorced, gone. He said it in a way that meant I should not ask what gone meant, and I didn't ask because I made choices I'm not proud of tonight. I'm being honest with you about that. I know, Serafina said. What you don't know, Vanessa said, and her voice shifted slightly. Tighter, more focused. The voice of someone who has organized themselves around a specific point. Is that 6 weeks ago, Cassian asked me to attend a meeting with a man named Garrett. He said Garrett was a new legal associate. He wanted me there for optics, someone presentable, someone who looked like legitimate money. I sat in that meeting for 40 minutes, and I heard things I wasn't supposed to understand, and I did understand them. Serafina's hand tightened on the phone. What things? She said. Your witness list, Vanessa said. Not all of it, but enough. He had names. He had a number. 31. He had 2 names he specifically wanted prioritized. Graves and Tolan. The printing floor was very quiet. Vanessa, Serafina said, are you willing to document this? I'm willing to do more than document it, Vanessa said. I'm willing to testify in whatever room, in front of whatever authority, on whatever timeline you need. A pause. He used me as cover for that meeting. He sat me in that chair and used my face and my presence to make that conversation look legitimate, and he didn't tell me what I was sitting in on. That's not a thing I can set down. Serafina looked at the dark ceiling of the printing floor, at the pipes and the concrete and the bad light. Where are you now? She said. Still at the hotel. Leave, Serafina said. Right now. Take nothing you can't carry in your hands. Go to street level and get in a cab. Not a car service, a cab, paid cash. And go to... She thought for 2 seconds. The Tillman on West 44th. Book it under a name that isn't yours. Call me when you're there. Okay, Vanessa said. No hesitation. No negotiation. She hung up. Serafina stood in the shadow of the printing machinery, and she breathed once, hard, through her nose, and she let the recalibration complete itself. Garrett had not been Cassian's inside man in Edith's office by accident. Cassian had placed him. But Cassian had also used Vanessa as unwitting cover for the meeting where the witness infrastructure had been discussed, which meant there was a witness to that meeting who had not been on anyone's list, who had not been approached or bought or frightened, who was currently sitting in Suite 712 of the Harmon Continental in a red dress with 2 years of accumulated grievance and nothing left to protect. The 12 accounts plus Vanessa. It was not Aldecoa. It was not the specific structural charge she had wanted, but it was a witness to the conspiracy to subvert the witness list, which was its own category of exposure, which pointed toward Aldecoa as a destination even if it didn't arrive there tonight. It was something. It might be enough. She walked back toward the main light. Shut. She had 40 seconds of believing the night might be recoverable. Then the door of the printing floor opened, and one of Marco's phones rang simultaneously, and everything that had been hovering at a controlled tension broke through it. The man in the doorway was not Marco's contact. He was not Augusto, whose building this was. He was a man Serafina recognized from the periphery of the organization's operational landscape. She did not know his name, but she knew his function, which was the specific function of someone sent to a location to confirm a presence before reporting back. He saw her the same moment she saw him. He reached for his phone. Marco moved faster than anyone in the room had anticipated from a man his size. He crossed the distance in 4 steps, and he had the man's phone arm controlled before the call connected, a grip at the wrist and elbow that leveraged the joint in a way that produced a short, bitten-off sound from the man and the phone hitting the concrete floor. "Back door," Marco said to Serafina. Not loudly, just clearly. She was already moving. Harlan grabbed the folder from the table, both hands pressed flat against his chest, and followed her through the space between the presses toward the rear of the building. Behind them she heard a brief, violent exchange of movement and a second impact, and then Marco's footsteps coming fast. The back door opened into an alley that smelled like old rain and diesel and the specific urban mineral smell of wet concrete. A narrow passage between 2 buildings, dim, ending on the left at a cross street where traffic was still moving at this hour. "The car's on the front street," Marco said, arriving behind them. "We can't go back to the front," Harlan said. "I know." "Marco," Serafina said, "how many people did he send? To confirm your location?" "1. To move on it?" He checked his phone, which had rung twice during the last 40 seconds, and which he had not answered. "I don't know. Maybe already in place." She looked at the cross street at the end of the alley, at the cabs moving through it, at the distance, which was 30 feet of open alley in bad light. "Go," she said. They went. The cab took them to a diner on 10th Avenue that was open all night and occupied at this hour by a handful of people who had no interest in anyone else's business. They took the booth in the back corner, Serafina and Harlan on one side, Marco on the other, and the folder sat on the table between them like a third party, and the waitress came and Serafina ordered coffee because her hands needed something to do. Her phone was in her left hand. She was watching it. At 1:03 a.m., Edith called. "He's filed an emergency injunction," Edith said. "Brannigan moved faster than we anticipated. They're claiming the ownership documentation is fraudulent, that the structures were established without proper authorization during the original corporate formation." "That argument fails," Serafina said. "The authorization is documented." "Yes," Edith said, "but it's going to require a hearing to establish that. Brannigan has requested an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," Serafina said. "How?" "They have a judge," Edith said. "Hartwell. Hartwell was at the gala tonight," Serafina said. The line was quiet for a moment. "Yes," Edith said. Serafina set her coffee down. She looked at the table. She thought about Judge Hartwell's face as she had seen it across the ballroom, attentive, careful, the face of a man filing information. And she thought about the 32 years of Hartwell's career and the 2 specific moments in that career that Harlan had documented in the folder currently sitting on the table in front of her. "Edith," she said, The hearing is an intimidation tactic. I know. He's trying to force a settlement before the federal inquiry can gain traction. I know that too. What's the worst-case outcome of the hearing? A temporary freeze on asset transfer pending verification, 60 to 90 days, during which time he continues operational control. Nominally, Edith said. In practice, the legitimate business assets are already functionally suspended from his use pending the filing. But yes, a successful injunction buys him time. And time is what he needs, Serafina said. Yes. She looked at Harlan. The Hartwell file. Harlan opened the folder. He found the relevant pages and slid them across to her. She looked at them. 2 incidents. One from 11 years ago, one from 6. Both documented. Both involving the specific kind of financial relationship between a sitting judge and an organized criminal enterprise that ended careers and occasionally ended freedom. Both verified. She had never intended to use these. Not directly, not as leverage. That was a line she had drawn for herself when she built the folder, because there was a version of this that became something she did not want to be, and using documented judicial corruption as personal leverage rather than as a submission to appropriate authority was that version. She looked at the pages. She looked at Harlan. If we submit this to the federal inquiry tonight, she said, as part of the whistleblower package, Hartwell is disqualified from the hearing, Harlan said. The injunction request dies with his recusal. And we've crossed nothing, she said, saying it aloud, making sure. We've crossed nothing, Harlan agreed. It's a legitimate submission through a legitimate channel. It's what the file was built for. She looked at it for one more second. Then she looked at Marco. Marco was watching her with the patient, steady expression of a man who has made his own choices and is not going to participate in making hers. Do it, she said to Harlan. He picked up his phone. At 1:34 a.m., Cassian Morello walked into the diner on 10th Avenue. She saw him before the door had fully opened, recognized the silhouette, the posture, the way he moved through a room with his chin slightly raised and his eyes already scanning. He had changed out of the tuxedo. He was wearing a dark jacket over a gray shirt, and he looked like what he was at this hour. A man who had been awake too long, working too hard, and had run out of the intermediate steps between himself and whatever was in front of him. He saw her. He came directly to the booth. Marco stood. He positioned himself between the table and Cassian's approach with a precision that was not aggressive but was absolute. The physical language of a man who has crossed a line and knows it and is not moving back. Cassian looked at Marco. He looked at him for a long moment. Whatever passed between them in that look was something that had been building for 3 years according to Marco's own account, and it resolved now into a single, irreversible recognition. 19 years, Cassian said. Yes, Marco said. That's what it was worth to you. That's not what you're asking, Marco said. What you're asking is what she was worth, and you know the answer because you knew it at the warehouse, and you knew it when you were deciding she wasn't worth it anymore. The muscle in Cassian's jaw moved. He looked past Marco at Serafina. Move, he said to Marco. No, Marco said. Serafina put her hand on Marco's arm. Not to pull him back, just a touch, brief and certain, the specific contact of a person asserting authority without force. Marco held his position for one more second and then stepped to the side, not retreating but repositioning, remaining close. Cassian sat down across from her. He looked older than he had looked in the ballroom. Not by years, by the specific quality of exhaustion that accumulates in a single night when a man is confronting the collapse of something he believed was solid. His eyes were still the same amber color, still that particular quality of cold that she had stopped finding beautiful somewhere around year 7. But underneath the cold, tonight, there was something she had not seen in him in a long time. Fear. Not the manageable, operational kind of fear that focused a person. The other kind. How much do you have, Bao? He said. His voice was low, almost conversational. Enough, she said. The witnesses, 12 solid accounts plus a new witness, she said. Someone who was present at the meeting where you discussed the witness list. Someone you put in that room as cover without telling her what she was sitting in on. Something moved behind his eyes. Quick, brief, then controlled again. Vanessa, he said. You used her, Serafina said. You sat her in that room to make it look like a legitimate legal meeting, and you didn't tell her what she was there for. She understood what she heard, and she's been sitting with it for 6 weeks. Cassian looked at the table. He put both hands flat on the surface. She could see the tendons. She could see the pressure he was applying to keep them still. The injunction, he said. The judge has a conflict, she said. That conflict has been submitted to the federal inquiry in the last 20 minutes. The hearing won't proceed. The last piece of what he had positioned fell away from him in this moment, and she watched it happen in real time. Watched the last operational option he had been holding dissolve, and watched the space it left behind fill with something raw and unstructured. The specific expression of a man who has reached the end of his available moves. Then what? He said, very quiet. What are you after? I already told you in the ballroom, she said. You said you were taking the business assets. I am. And the other thing, he said, the inquiry, the witnesses, the federal submission. What is that for? She looked at him. It's for the truth. His eyes came up to hers. The truth destroys everything, both of us. It destroys what you built on top of what I built, she said. What I built is documented and clean and legally structured, and it survives an inquiry. You were part of it, he said. The words came out tight, strained at the edges. Every structure you built it knowing what it was for. Yes, she said, I did. And I've made my own arrangements regarding my own exposure. That's been handled. She paused. I didn't walk into tonight without accounting for myself. He stared at her, the understanding of what that meant, the specific legal arrangements that could convert a complicit architect into a cooperating witness, the category of agreement that produced immunity in exchange for documented testimony, moved through his face slowly, comprehensively, the way understanding moved through a man who was used to being the one who thought 3 steps ahead and had just discovered he was 4 steps behind. You made a deal, he said. I made an arrangement, she said, before tonight. Months ago, she said, before the gala, before the filing. The submission tonight was the final step of something that's been in place for a long time. His hands pressed harder against the table. The surface was formica, cheap, scratched, the kind of table that had absorbed 1,000 conversations in this diner and would absorb 1,000 more. She watched his knuckles whiten. Cassian, she said. He looked at her. I gave you every year of my 20s, she said. I gave you the architecture that made everything possible. I gave you the legal foundation and the financial structure and 11 years of absolute loyalty, and when you decided I was no longer part of the picture, you discarded me the way you discarded every other thing that had served its purpose. You didn't lose me. You threw me away. And you did it without ever once considering that the thing you were throwing away was the foundation the entire structure stood on. His jaw was tight. His eyes were tight. His whole face was tight with the effort of containing something that had no good exit. I loved you, he said. The words came out stripped of everything. No performance, no strategy, nothing left in them but the bare, ugly, too-late truth of them. She looked at him. I know, she said. So did I. The past tense of it sat between them on the scratched formica table. He held her gaze for 5 seconds, 6, 7, and in those seconds she could see it all moving through him. The warehouse and the Yonkers Drive, and every year of what they had built, and every specific moment of what he had chosen instead, moving through him the way it moved through her sometimes. The full weight of it, everything it had been, and everything it had become, and the unbridgeable distance between those two things. Then his phone rang. He looked at it. He looked back at her. Don't answer it, she said quietly. Whatever it is, it won't change anything. He picked it up anyway. He looked at the screen. Whatever he saw there rearranged his face into something she didn't have a name for. A new expression, one she had never seen on him in 11 years, that combined the physiognomy of a man receiving catastrophic news with the specific, terrible stillness of a man who understands that the catastrophe is not an obstacle, but The phone call lasted 47 seconds. Serafina watched Cassian's face for all 47 of them, and she did not look away because she understood, with the specific instinct of someone who had spent 11 years learning to read this particular man, that what she was seeing was not recoverable. Whatever the voice on the other end was telling him, It was not the kind of news a person absorbed and then reorganized around. It was the kind that reorganized them, whether they consented to it or not. He set the phone down on the table. He did not look at her immediately. He looked at the phone, at the scratched formica around it, at his own hands flat on the surface. His breathing had changed. She could see it in the way his chest moved, shallower, faster, the breathing of a man whose body had received information before his mind finished processing it. "Cassian," she said. He looked up. "Brannigan withdrew," he said. His voice was not flat. It was something worse than flat. It was empty. The voice of a man speaking from a space where the usual architecture of control had been vacated. "The firm. They withdrew representation. Effective immediately." She said nothing. "All three partners," he said. "Simultaneously. Tonight." He paused. They cited a conflict of interest they were not able to specify. Harlan, across the table, did not move, but something in his posture shifted by a fraction that only Serafina noticed, and she filed it. "The Hartwell submission," Cassian said. It was not a question. "You submitted something that connected Brannigan to Hartwell." "The submission was complete and accurate," she said. "Whatever connections existed within it existed before tonight." He looked at her. The emptiness in his voice had begun filling with something, not the volcanic fury she might have expected, not the cold operational calculation she would have predicted 2 hours ago. Something quieter and more final, the specific weight of a man arriving at the last room in a house he has been walking through for a very long time. "So it's done," he said. "The injunction is done," she said. "The hearing won't proceed. The asset freeze stands." "And the inquiry?" "The inquiry proceeds on its own timeline," she said. "I don't control that." He looked at her for a long moment. "How much did you give them?" "Enough." "Enough for what?" She held his gaze. "Enough for them to understand what the organization is, what it was, how it was built, and what it was built on." "You included yourself," he said. "I told you. I made arrangements." "Immunity. Cooperation," she said, "full and documented, in exchange for testimony and the financial records. My attorney spent 4 months negotiating the terms. I don't face prosecution for the work I did during the foundation years. What I receive in return is a clean transfer of the legitimate asset holdings and a documented legal standing in the structures I built." He absorbed this, the mechanics of it, the specific, careful architecture of a woman who had not just reclaimed what was hers, but had spent months ensuring that reclamation was legally unassailable, protected on every side, reviewed and certified by people whose institutional authority made it permanent. "You thought of everything," he said. "I tried," she said. And there was nothing triumphant in the way she said it. It was just true. Marco was standing 6 feet from the table, hands loose at his sides, watching Cassian with the specific vigilance of a man who knows the person he is watching and is not yet certain what they will do at the end of their options. Cassian glanced at him once, and then back at Serafina. "What happens to the operational side?" he said. "The non-legitimate structures." "That's not my business," she said. "It was never documented in anything I controlled. Whatever exists there exists independent of the legitimate holdings." She paused. "But without the financial infrastructure that I built, without the hotels and the shipping companies and the investment firm, the operational side has no clean revenue stream, no legitimate cover, no movement mechanism that withstands scrutiny." "You cut the legs out from under it," he said. "I removed what was mine," she said. "I built the legs. I took them back." He was quiet for a moment. In the diner around them, life continued at its 2 a.m. register. The waitress refilling something at the counter, the low murmur of 2 other occupied booths, the particular ambient hum of a city that never fully slept. Normal sounds, unremarkable. The sounds of a world that had not noticed that 11 years of something were ending in a back corner booth over cold coffee. "I have people," he said, 70, 80 people who work the legitimate side. Managers, staff. They work for the companies, she said. The companies continue to operate. Employment is unaffected. Under you. Under the holding structure, she said, which I control. Yes. He looked at his hands. He turned them over once, a gesture she had seen him make before years ago, in the warehouse, when he was working through something that didn't have a clean resolution. the gesture of a man looking at his own hands to remind himself they were still there. "I need to ask you something," he said. She waited. "The Aldecoa incident," he said. The name settled into the space between them with all the weight it carried. She did not look away from him. "What about it?" she said. "Tallinn went dark," he said. "That was my doing. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't." He paused. "But the incident itself. You knew. You've always known." "Yes," she said. "And the inquiry. Aldecoa is not part of the submission," she said. "Tallinn's account is gone. Without a witness present at the incident, there is no documentable basis for an Aldecoa charge. The submission does not include what cannot be verified." He looked at her. Something moved across his face that she could not fully read. Not relief, because relief was too clean for what his face was doing, but the complicated, uncomfortable response of a man who has just been shown a mercy he had not earned and cannot reconcile with the version of events he was expecting. "Why?" he said. It was the simplest version of a much longer question, and they both knew it. She looked at him for a moment. She looked at the hands on the table, at the amber eyes that had nothing warm in them and never had, but which she had looked into for 11 years anyway, at the face of a man she had loved in the specific, structural, unrepeatable way she had been capable of loving, which was a way she did not expect to be capable of again. "Because I was there," she said quietly. "Not at Aldecoa, but in the years before it. I was there and I built what you needed and I knew what I was building for, and I cannot stand in front of any authority and give myself complete absolution for what the organization became, even with an immunity arrangement, even with the cooperation agreement. I carry a portion of that. I've always known that." "So you protected yourself," he said. "I protected the truth," she said. "What I submitted is true. What I withheld is unverifiable. Those are different categories." He was quiet for a long time. "You're a better lawyer than Brannigan," he said finally. "I had to be," she said. "You weren't paying attention, so I had to pay attention for both of us." Something crossed his face then. Brief, involuntary. The ghost of an expression she recognized from the warehouse years, from the diner booths and the 2 a.m. coffee runs and the Yonkers drive in the pre-dawn dark. Something almost like the person he had been before the prosperity had rearranged him. It lasted about 2 seconds, and then it was gone. He pushed back from the table. He stood. He picked up his phone. He looked at her one final time, not with the residue of the evening's war, not with the operational calculus of a man assessing an opponent, but with something older and less organized, the look of a person regarding something they have permanently lost and are in the specific process of accepting that it is permanent. "I'll have my people clear the executive offices at the Continental by end of week," he said. His voice was steady. Whatever it cost him to make it steady was not visible. "That's sufficient," she said. He nodded once. He looked at Marco. Marco met his eyes and held them, and did not apologize with his expression, which Cassian absorbed without speaking. Then Cassian Morello walked through the diner to the front door and pushed through it into the 2 a.m. city, and the door swung shut behind him, and that was the last time Serafina looked at him directly. Marco sat back down. The three of them stayed in the booth for a while without speaking, which was appropriate because the silence was doing something that words would have interrupted. Settling, the way the air in a room settles after a long storm, finding its new level. Harlan had the folder closed in front of him. He put both hands on top of it and looked at the surface and said nothing. "Aldecoa," Marco said eventually. Not accusing, just placing the word in the space. "Not submittable without Tallinn," Serafina said. "That's the truth." "Yes," Marco said. "It is." "It's also not the only truth," she said. "No," Marco agreed. She looked at him. "You were there." He was quiet. "Not at Aldecoa," she said. "But you knew. You've always known." "Yes," he said. "If you chose to make a statement—" "I know," he said. "I've thought about it." He looked at the table. "I've been thinking about it for 3 years." "And," she said. "And I don't know yet," he said. "I need more time with that." She nodded. That was honest, and she valued honest more than she valued convenient, even when inconvenient was harder to work with. "Take the time," she said. Whatever you decide, it's yours to decide. He looked at her. You're not going to push. I've pushed enough things tonight, she said. I'm tired. He almost smiled. Not quite, but the architecture of it was there. Harlan left the diner at 2:30 a.m. He took the folder with him, which she had not asked him to leave and would not have. He had spent 8 years building what was in that folder, and it was his the way the financial architecture was hers. Not by transaction, but by the specific, irreplaceable labor of someone who had done a thing that no one else could have done in quite that way. At the door he paused and looked back at her. The warehouse, he said. She looked at him. I drove past it last year, he said. They put up condominiums. She thought about that, about the sawhorse desk and the cold and the bad computer and the diesel smell. That's probably better for the neighborhood, she said. He almost smiled too. Then he pushed through the door and was gone. She sat alone in the booth for a while after Marco left. She ordered more coffee, which she didn't drink, and she sat with her hands around the mug and looked at the surface of the table and let herself be tired in a way she had not allowed herself to be since 17 months ago, when the preparation began and exhaustion became a thing she deferred rather than a thing she experienced. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. At the Tillman. Room 408. Whenever you're ready. She looked at the message for a moment, then she typed, tomorrow morning, get some sleep. A pause. Then, thank you. She set the phone down. She thought about Vanessa sitting in suite 712 in her red dress in the dark, doing the meticulous, painful work of reconstructing what she knew. She thought about the 4 minutes they had spoken at a function 2 years ago, before Serafina had understood the full geometry of the situation, when they had talked about nothing in particular with a quality of mutual, cautious attention that had not been unfriendly. She thought about what it meant that this woman, who had every reason to remain uninvolved, who could have left the ballroom and disappeared back into the life she'd had before Cassian, had instead sat in a hotel room for 2 hours and decided that being used as unwitting cover for something she understood and opposed was not a thing she could set down. That took a particular kind of character. Serafina recognized it because it was adjacent to a character she knew something about. Vanessa Vale gave her testimony 3 weeks later in a federal building downtown, in a conference room with bad lighting and a court reporter and 2 federal attorneys who asked precise, careful questions in the manner of people who already knew the answers and were building the record rather than discovering it. She was composed. She was accurate. She did not editorialize, and she did not perform contrition, and she did not attempt to manage the impression she was making. She said what she knew, and she said it clearly, and when she was finished, she walked out of the building into the midday light, and she did not look back. Serafina was not there. She had no business being there, and she did not manufacture a reason. But Edith's associate, not Garrett, who had been quietly removed from the case structure with a settlement that required his permanent silence, called her that afternoon and told her the testimony had been received as complete and credible. And she had said thank you and hung up and stood at the window of her office in one of the hotels she now operated and looked at the city below. The hotel was the Meridian on Park Avenue South, which she had incorporated into the holding structure in year 3 of the organization's legitimate expansion, and which was, financially speaking, the cleanest and most structurally sound of all the properties, the one she had visited most often during the years of building, the one whose management staff she knew by name, the one whose occupancy numbers she had tracked with a personal investment that exceeded what the financial relationship required. She had chosen it as her operational base because it felt like hers in a way that went beyond documentation. And she had decided, in the weeks since the gala, to stop apologizing to herself for caring about things in ways that exceeded their functional necessity. She had been doing that for too long. The federal inquiry moved with the particular pace of institutional processes, which was to say it moved slowly and then suddenly. Indictments were issued 5 months after the gala. Cassian's name appeared on 2 of them, which was fewer than Serafina had anticipated and more than his attorneys had expected. The charges were financial in nature, the kind that produced outcomes measured in assets and restrictions rather than the kind measured in years. He was not incarcerated. He retained legal counsel from a firm that was not Brannigan, which had dissolved entirely in the 3 months following its midnight withdrawal of representation, its 3 partners separately under investigation for their own adjacency to the structures they had been paid to defend. Cassian's operational network did not dissolve. She had not expected it to. Criminal organizations did not dissolve when their financial infrastructure was removed. They contracted and adapted, which was a different thing and someone else's problem to manage. What she had done was remove the clean revenue stream, the legitimate cover, the ability to move money through the economy in ways that compounded and multiplied and funded the next generation of the thing. The roots remained, but she had taken the canopy, and without the canopy, the roots could not indefinitely sustain what had grown from them. That would have to be enough because it was what was true. She did not feel triumphant about it. She had spent 17 months believing that the completion of this thing would produce a feeling she could identify and name, something clean and final, a sensation of settlement. What she actually felt in the months that followed was more complicated and less satisfying. The feeling of a person who has done a necessary thing and discovered that necessary things do not make you feel the way you imagined they would. They make you feel the weight of what they cost and what they couldn't fix and what was lost before you ever started preparing to reclaim it. She felt that weight. She carried it without putting it down because it was hers, and she had earned it. Marco De Luca made his statement 8 months after the gala. He did it through his own attorney, independently, without contact with Serafina's legal team, without coordination or preparation with anyone she knew. She learned about it the same way the rest of the world learned about it, through a filing that appeared in the public record on a Tuesday morning in July. The statement was 7 pages. It addressed 3 incidents spanning 9 years. It was specific, documented, and it addressed Aldecoa. She sat at her desk in the Meridian and read all 7 pages twice. Then she set the document down and looked at the window and stayed with what she felt, which was not the satisfaction of a completed picture, but something quieter and harder. The recognition that a man had decided after a long time that 19 years of loyalty to the wrong thing was not the permanent condition of his life, and had paid the price of that decision in the specific currency that decision required. The price was considerable. It meant the end of the world he had known, the complete severance from everything he had built his adult life inside. It meant exposure to liability he had spent decades avoiding. It meant, functionally, a kind of starting over that was available to him only because he was 52 and not 70, which was a narrower margin than comfortable and wider than 0. She did not call him. He did not call her. 6 weeks later, she received a postcard. No return address. A photograph of a city she did not recognize. Coastal, Mediterranean in appearance, warm light on stone buildings. On the back, in handwriting she recognized from 19 years of proximity, took the time, made the decision. This is better. She put the postcard in the drawer of her desk at the Meridian, and she did not throw it away. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday in October, 11 months after the gala, in a courthouse in Lower Manhattan. It was administrative in its texture. Paperwork, signatures. A judge who was not Hartwell. 40 minutes of procedural language that converted something that had been true for 11 years into something that was no longer. Cassian was not present. He was represented by his attorney, a woman named Carol, who was brisk and efficient, and who shook Serafina's hand afterward with the particular neutrality of a professional who had learned to have no feelings about the human architecture of the cases she processed. Serafina's attorney was Edith. They took the subway back uptown because Edith had always preferred the subway to car services, and Serafina had learned, in the past year, to find this quality in Edith's character more endearing than inconvenient. They sat side by side in the car with their respective bags on their laps, and the city moving underground around them, and Edith did not ask how she was feeling because Edith was not that kind of person, which was one of the primary reasons Serafina trusted her. The Meridian's Q3 numbers came in, Serafina said. I saw, Edith said, 7% above projection. It's a well-run property, Edith said. The management team is good, Serafina agreed. I've been mostly leaving them alone, and it turns out that's the right call. Edith looked at her. You've been mostly leaving everything alone lately. Yes. Is that sustainable? Serafina thought about this. I don't know yet. The train moved through a tunnel section, and the lights flickered once and returned, and through the window there was nothing to see but the dark wall of the tunnel moving past its speed. What do you want to do? Edith said. Not as her attorney. As something else. The specific relationship that developed between people who had been in difficult rooms together and had come through the same door at the end. Serafina thought about what she wanted to do. She thought about the sawhorse desk and the cold and the specific quality of the work in those early years, before the money changed the texture of everything. The particular satisfaction of building something real from materials that were not glamorous and making it work through attention and precision and the refusal to do anything halfway. She had not felt that quality in a long time. She had been reclaiming and defending and preparing and executing, and those things had consumed her with their necessity, but they were not the same thing as building. "I want to build something," she said. Edith looked at her. "Clean," Serafina said, "from the beginning, with the right structure and the right people and nothing in the foundation that has to be hidden." She paused. "I know how to build things. I've always known. I want to do it once in a way that doesn't require 17 months of preparation to undo." Edith was quiet for a moment. Then, "The shipping company, the Port Morris facility." Serafina looked at her. "It came through the asset transfer clean," Edith said. "No federal interest in it. The inquiry focused on the financial instruments and the casino operations. The Port Morris facility is yours, unencumbered, and it has legitimate contracts with 3 carriers through the end of next year." She paused. "It also has a management team that hasn't had a functional owner paying attention since approximately year 6 of the organization. They've been running it on inertia." Serafina thought about Port Morris, about the waterfront, about the specific smell of the harbor on a cold morning, brine and diesel, which she associated with a building that no longer existed and a time in her life that was gone. "That's appropriate," she said. "I thought so," Edith said. The train pulled into the station, and the doors opened and people moved in and out with the automatic efficiency of a city that processed its own motion without thinking about it. And Serafina sat with her bag in her lap and thought about Port Morris and clean foundations and the particular satisfaction of work that was worth doing. She thought about what it had cost to get here. She thought about the warehouse and the cold and the sawhorse desk, about the Yonkers Drive in the pre-dawn gray, about the way a silence could be the most solid thing in a life at a particular moment, and about the distance between that moment and this one, and about whether the distance was a thing to grieve or a thing to measure and set down. She set it down. She didn't put it away. She had learned by now that certain things were not available for putting away, that they lived in the specific part of you that had been shaped by them and did not shrink because you wanted them to. But she set it down in the sense of releasing the active weight of it, the sense of deciding it was finished, not resolved, because some things did not resolve, but finished, complete in itself, no longer requiring her to carry it forward. The train moved. The city moved around it. She looked at the dark window and saw her own reflection in it, clearer than the reflection in the hotel conference table on the night of the gala, less distorted, the ivory dress replaced by a gray wool coat, and the carefully arranged hair replaced by something that a year of not performing had made more itself. And she looked at this woman in the glass for a moment without the need to assess or analyze or calculate anything about her. Just looked. "Port Morris," she said. "Monday," Edith said. "I'll set up the walkthrough." "Monday," Serafina agreed. The train carried them uptown through the dark under the city, toward whatever the next thing was going to be, which was not revenge, and was not reclamation, and was not the completion of anything that had come before. It was just the next thing, with all the uncertainty that phrase contained and all the specific irreducible possibility that uncertainty, when you were finally done being afraid of it, turned out to hold. Outside, above them, and all around them, the city went on being itself, enormous and indifferent and relentless and alive, the way cities were, the way the world was, the way everything continued that was still worth continuing. She had built something once from nothing. She had taken it back from someone who had forgotten what it cost. She was going to build something again. This time, it would be entirely hers.